Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This is the Kizer S.L.T by John Gray. I'm going to try real hard not to refer to it as the slut, even though it's the way it sounds in my head. But S.L.T stands for Slimline Tactical, and it's a really interesting knife, and I want to thank my buddies Frankie and Bud for sending this guy along. It's a neat knife, and I don't think I would have fully understood the neatness just holding it and handling it for a couple of hours. So, very nice, thank you very much. Check out their channel, Birdshot IV. Moving along, quick size comparison here. Spyderco Delica, as always. Ontario Rat number 1, Ontario Rat number 2. Let's see here. Giant Mouse GM1, Ferrum Forge, Archbishop, and what the heck, ZT 0452CF. So you can see this is not a small blade. In fact, it's right along the same blade length overall as the Ontario Rat number 1. So there you go. And let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Kizer Slut here, S.L.T. So on the good side, first and foremost, I do enjoy the megapivot here. For those of you who watched the disassembly video, it's not actually that big in the center portion. There's just a really big head on these screws here. But it is kind of entertaining, and honestly, it's a neat little design touch. This seems to be a hallmark of John Gray's designs. If you look at his website, they've all got these big, huge pivots. So, you know, hey, whatever. The nice things about it are that it's actually got a functional purpose. If you take a nice close look here, you can see that this actually serves as an over-travel stop for the lock bar. So this prevents the lock bar from going too far in that direction, which is kind of a nice thing. The other nice thing about it is that although it looks like a Phillips head screw, this is very easily operable with just a boring US quarter or any other coin, I imagine. So the mega pivot is kind of a neat little touch. It's a little silly, let's be real here, but at the same time, it works. No complaints. The blade shape and blade overall on this guy is good to go. The steel is S35VN, one of my very favorite steels. The blade shape itself is good. It's got plenty of piercing power here. Plenty of piercing power, little alliteration. But nonetheless, you know, you've got a nice thick blade stock here for what you're going for. It's good. The tip is a little on the fragile side, but not too bad. You've got some straight portion, some belly, which I always appreciate. And the blade design overall is nice. I don't mind the little bit of harpoon he's got going on here. The whole thing is just absolutely beautiful and kind of offsets nicely. There's a symmetry here, which I appreciate. So, yeah, the blade on it's good. The ergonomics on this knife are very good. They're not perfect, but they're pretty damn good. You've got a nice thumb ramp going on here. The clip actually fills the hand a little bit nicely, and just overall, this is a great knife in the hand. I got no real complaints about this knife, ergonomically speaking, maybe excepting there's not a whole lot for your index finger to do in here, and I kind of want to cuddle up to the flipper tab a little bit more than necessary, but nonetheless, it's really good in the hand. I appreciate it very much. Another thing that's great on this knife is the clip. This is a milled, sculpted sort of clip, 3D machined, but the thing is, it's excellent. It's got plenty of spring to it, so it's not a problem to get into and out of your pocket any day of the week. It's nice and long, which really stabilizes the knife nicely and keeps it in the pocket. And it's subtle. There's not a whole lot of machining. There's not ZT on the side of it. It's just, it's a freaking clip. It's beautiful, and it makes this knife carry beautifully in the pocket. Because the angle is right, so this will hang kind of back to the edge of your pocket, and then your hand just slides right on by on this curved surface. It's a beautiful clip, and so this is a knife that's really nice in the pocket. It's big, it's a little heavy, but it carries beautifully. The construction on this guy is pretty straightforward. All you've got is the mega pivot here, and then this one backspacer. You'll want to make sure that yours isn't Loctited down. You know, there's a little bit of that, so heating it up with a hairdryer before you go with the screws is never a bad idea on a Kizer for the first time, because Kizer unfortunately tends to use softer screws, but the construction is not hard whatsoever here. It's using captive bearings, the mega pivot and that. It's 2 screws, you disassembled, 2 more screws, you're back together. I appreciate that very much. The action on this guy is actually pretty nice. You know, the detent is good and it fires 100% of the time. It's not the hardest detent in the world, but it doesn't need to be. It's a nice flipper. Absolutely, I enjoy flipping this knife. There's no complaint to be had about it. The closing action is fine. It's not the best, but it does the trick. So, you know, the action here is good. Then finally, this guy is kind of deceptively beefy. You look at it at first and it looks arty, but really, this is hardcore. I mean, you've got very thick blade stock here. You've got a grind that's, fairly thick behind the edge. We'll get there. But, the whole thing is going to be very durable, I feel like. S35VN is a good steel for that. The titanium here is very thick, very contoured. And there's no milling or anything on the inside there, so it's very, very strong. It's got this big solid over travel stop. It's got this big solid clip. I mean, this is a really beefy knife. I mean, he calls it the slimline tactical, and by God, this appears to be tactical as well as slimline. This is a beefy little knife. This is a knife that I think could take some crap if you throw it at it. So, there you go. So that's your good on the little slot here. You've got a mega pivot. You've got a really nice blade, good ergonomics, a milled clip. It's nice in the pocket. The construction is pretty simple, the action's good, and it's pretty beefy, even if it doesn't look it at first. Let's talk about the great. For me, the great thing about this knife is the design, and because a lot of your hardcore knives tend to look really hardcore. You get, the Hinderer designs, they look like, high-speed, low-drag weapon tactics. This guy looks like art, honestly. It's still a pretty reasonably hardcore knife, but it's artistic. It's got a big, bold statement with the mega pivot. Everything else is very smooth and minimal. You've got nice lines that are counterbalancing each other, the harpoon against this part here. This is beautifully designed. The whole thing is just gorgeous, and it's gorgeous in a way that I think a lot of people can readily understand, even if they're outside the knife world. So I like very, very much the design of this guy. I think it's art. And it also happens to be a pretty reasonably capable, hard-use sort of blade. So that's what's great about this knife, is the design is just, it really is a beautiful thing. And I mean that, and beautiful. So on the bad side, unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of Kizer's billboarding on this guy. This is a really, really big logo to have on a knife that's really minimal otherwise. So I wish they would have been a little bit more subtle like they were on the backside with the S.L.T. Not the end of the world. It's something to keep in mind. Next issue is it is a Kizer, so you've got to watch out for soft screws. They tend to use fasteners that strip out very easily, and they tend to use thread locker on those. So when you're first disassembling this guy, do a little bit of turning. Make sure there's very little or no resistance. And if there is any resistance, heat it up with a hairdryer first. That'll keep those screws from stripping due to the Loctite they put on there. Not a great thing, and, you can probably get replacement screws from Kizer. It's just going to take a while. So, there you go. Next weird thing about this knife is that the blade angle is actually a little bit trailing. I mean, on most knives, the blade is at the same line as the rest of the handle. Whereas on this guy, the blade kind of goes off a little bit more in this direction, and the handle is more straightforward. I don't know that it's a big deal, but it is a little unusual and maybe a little unintuitive for me. I'm sure I'd get used to it, but it makes push cuts a little bit more interesting. Yeah, there you go. Next issue, they're trying to make this a very hard-use sort of knife, but they're only using one single standoff in the back here. I would have liked to see a little blind post or something like that in there, just to provide a little bit more support for the handle overall. Mind you, this is thick titanium. It's not a big deal. But if you're calling this something that's more harder use and you're building the rest of it like a hard-use knife, one single standoff kind of toward the back isn't necessarily the approach I'd have taken. Whatever. Not a huge deal. Now we're getting into things that are huge deals. The edges of the mega pivot here, particularly these corners of the Phillips head here, are a little bit on the sharp side, and they will eat at your pocket. You can knock that down a little bit just with the ceramic rod, but I almost would have preferred if they just used they just made one cut, and that way there'd be less edge overall. Not the end of the world, but it is something you got to keep in mind, and something I would address with a sharpmaker stone if this were my knife. Next issue is that this is pretty thick behind the edge. I mean, if you take a look at it, right immediately behind the edge, you're up to some serious thickness. I'll see if I can show it off using this caliper here, but I mean, immediately you're jamming that right through whatever it is you're cutting. As opposed to other knives that are much better slicers, this is just not God's gift to slicing. It does the trick. It's not terrible, but it is way thick behind the edge. Makes it beefy, but makes it less ideal for some cutting tasks. Next issue is that, unfortunately, it's a pretty slippery knife once it's moist. I mean, as it is now, it's just fine, but this is a knife that doesn't have a whole lot of texturing to it. I mean, the clip is the biggest source of texture, and that'll do for a lot of things, as will the thumb ramp and things like that, but this is not a Vaseline factory sort of knife. This can fall out of your hand fairly straightforwardly the moment things start getting wet. So, there you go. This knife is pretty damn heavy, is the second to last bad thing. We're looking at almost 6 ounces, 5.8 ounces. This is meant to be a hard-use, beefy, sort of slimline tactical knife, but that is something to keep in mind. This is heavy. It's not the end of the world, and it carries well. There you go. Then finally, the price on this guy is up there. You're looking at $215 for a Kizer knife, and Kizer kind of built their reputation on making more inexpensive knives that are still really high in quality. And Kizer is slowly ratcheting their price points up, and I'm not a huge fan of it, because you lose a lot of the advantages that you get buying, say, from an American company, or even just a company with distributorships in the States, or at least long-term ones. You don't get close-in warranty service. It might take you longer, but the prices are still creeping up there. So this is getting to be awfully high for a Kizer knife. But maybe they're just trying to rebrand and go more the Rayot direction. Whatever, but the price is way up there. So that's your bad. I'm not a fan of the billboarding on the blade. Kizer always ships soft screws, which is not great. The trailing angle on the blade is a little unusual, at the very least. Single standoff is a little strange for a hard-use sort of knife. The megapivot is a little strange, with the edges being sharp in the middle here. It's pretty thick behind the edge, it's pretty slippery, it's pretty heavy, and the price is getting way up there for a Kizer. So, there you go. In terms of ugly, honestly, there's not ugly here. I got no slut shaming to do. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Maybe the mega pivot edges being a little sharp could be ugly, because they could, but no, there's not much bad here. So let's jump into the final conclusion. The big question for me is who this is for. Until finally it occurred to me who this is for. I imagine that the Persistence of Time, Salvador Dali's most famous painting, was stolen from the Museum of Modern Art by ISIS, the Islamic State folks, and was taken off to Syria or wherever the heck they're based out of these days, and, in one of their compounds. And, of course, you want to send in the Army Rangers, the Navy SEALs, the high-speed, low-drag tactical operators. But the thing is, they don't know anything about art. They can't authenticate it. They can't make sure that this wasn't a swapped-in post sort of thing, a fraud. And so, of course, they need to send artists. And so, for the very first time, the tactical response team from the Museum of Modern Art is actually put into service. And, what are they carrying in their little tactical vests? This knife right here. This is the Museum of Modern Art Tactical Response Team's perfect knife choice. I know that's kind of an odd endorsement, and I don't know that exists, but by God, this would be perfect for them, because it is a reasonably capable, hard-use sort of knife. It's got a good action, it's got a good blade, it's really beefy, you're not going to hurt it. Even if it's not going to be the best slicer, it's going to be a great tactical sort of knife. It's got a lot of functional goodness to it, and it's absolutely freaking beautiful in a modern art sort of sense. And so that's the situation where this knife makes the most sense, is at the Tactical Art Team squad. But it's also a very weird knife. For a lot of people, this isn't going to make sense. If you don't love the design, then don't buy this knife. There's a lot of other stuff out there. But if you do love the design, it is absolutely compelling. And the beauty of this design makes up for some of those flaws. The thickness behind the edge, the slipperiness, the weight, and honestly, the price. I would call this one a low-grade gem. I really like that, but that's very, very personal to me, because I really like this design. If you don't love the design, then don't even bother. But I'm impressed, and I like very much what John Gray is, I'm picking up what he's putting down here, and I think there's a lot of good here. So if you're at all interested, you may want to give this sled a little romp. It's a very, very impressive little knife. So, big knife, I suppose. I hope this has been interesting. I hope that the Museum of Modern Art does not need to activate its Tactical Response Squadron anytime soon. And I hope that you all have the absolutely best rest of your day that you can. Bye now.